Are you looking for a book to help you be more authentic and some concrete practices to start applying to your life? Check out this month's book therapy pick. Hey guys, my name is Diana Garcia. I'm a licensed mental health counselor in Florida, owner of a private practice called Nurturing Minds Counseling. If you're new around here, my monthly book therapy series is where I pick one self-help mental health book to review, recommend, and highlight at least 3 insights just in case you never get the chance to read the book. As you noticed, I tend to skip December to give myself and you a break through the holiday season, so now we're back in January and let's jump into this month's pick. Alright guys, so this month's pick is The Gift of Imperfection by Brené Brown, as you can see from the screen, and my Kindle version. So I actually read the original version, this is like the original cover here, years and years ago, and honestly, this is one of the books that I really enjoyed from Brené Brown. I like some of her other books as well, but this one is just an easy, quick read, but there's also just so many tools in here that you can just take away and practices. And I think that's what I really liked and gravitated towards this book. And I was recently talking to someone and we both kind of really talked about our love for Brené Brown, including this book. So I decided to pick up the 10-year anniversary or download it and really see what's new, what's different, reading it years later, what were still my thoughts. Honestly, I still recommend it. I think it's a great and easy way, again, just to start to understand some of these concepts of learning to be more authentic, to be courageous, to live your life in a different way, and again, shifting into some concrete practices. As you can see here from the summary in the screen, the book again starts with a 10-year anniversary now, so Brené just goes through and kind of talks about the learnings in books, as well as just some updates on her life and how she's tried to apply these concepts, clearly not perfectly. And then she goes through and introduces this concept of wholehearted living, which we'll talk about in a second. Then, of course, the majority of the book is then going through guidepost 1 through 10. So this is guidepost 1 through 5. I'm not going to go through each one, and honestly, in today's 3 key insights, I'm only going to review one guidepost with some other kind of insights from other parts of the book, but just for you to have a sense of like what are the guideposts that she's going to go through in a review. This is guidepost 6 through 10. So again, in each guidepost, you'll see you're trying to cultivate some type of habit or, again, qualities in your life. So cultivating calm and stillness, and then letting go of anxiety as a lifestyle. The chapters on the different guideposts, for the most part, are pretty short. Again, really digestible. She'll go through some research. She'll kind of reference how she came with the definition of some of these different concepts or qualities, or what the current research was already saying, and then how to let go, kind of the inverse, kind of the barriers that get in the way of cultivating calm and stillness. Okay, insight number 1 is really diving into this concept of wholehearted living, because the whole premise of the book is really helping you increase this wholehearted living in your life, and she calls it a revolution to really start to step into your life from this place. So what does she even mean, or what is she even talking about? She defines this wholehearted living, again, and this is a concept that she came up with as she did a whole bunch of research and listened to people's stories over time and figured out that certain people have something distinct or different that she called wholehearted living, and which the guideposts are kind of based on. Pretty much it's about engaging from a place that you're worthy. So ultimately believing that you are good enough, that you are worthy of belonging and connection. And part of that really involves cultivating courage, compassion, and connection. And it's really kind of the thought process of thinking, yes, I am imperfect and flawed, an imperfect human being. Sometimes I mess up, I struggle, but ultimately it doesn't change the fact that I am worthy of connection and love, right? So that's the whole piece of wholehearted living. How can we really step into this place? And the whole guidepost that she does throughout the book is really to help you start to cultivate more of these elements of wholehearted living, because she talks about in her research, the people who really kind of embodied this type of living really kind of cultivated these different practices of their lives and let go of others. This other piece that she also goes through some common barriers that gets in the way. That I really want to add here, if you are going to pick up the book, or if you really are going to dive through some of these guideposts, I actually would encourage you to stop and pause and take this actually self-assessment that she has on her website. I've linked it below, the Wholehearted Living Inventory. So pretty much you're going to honestly answer these questions and go through these different kind of guideposts, and you'll get an actual assessment at the end to really see kind of what are maybe the areas that you're already having some strengths in, and maybe what are the guideposts that would really benefit from you starting to shift and focus. So I actually did this when I restarted reading the book before I started to go through the guidepost. It's really cool because then you actually can do a printout or an email to see some of these guideposts. And it was also helpful as I was reading the book to see which is the one that I really needed to focus on. Ironically, or not so ironically, maybe because that's who I work with the most, the one that I really needed to cultivate is cultivating calm and stillness and letting go of anxiety as a lifestyle. So if you actually take the inventory, let me know in the comments below which is the guidepost that you really need to work on, which is the one that you would benefit the most. Let me know in the comments below. Insight number 2, it's again, so she dedicates a little bit of the beginning portion of the book to talking about some of the barriers that get in the way. Because she talks about, ultimately, Brené Brown is a shame researcher. She talks about that was not her intention and goal. When she started to do research, she was actually trying to focus on human connection and love and belonging and worthiness, kind of all these concepts that overall seem pretty kind of positive, but she kept running into, in her research, barriers that get in the way of people engaging or acting in their lives this way. Shame was a huge barrier that she continually saw show up in different individuals' lives, hence why she really started to dive into more of kind of this shame research. So one thing to really think about, the second insight is all about that. It's what's one thing that gets in the way? Shame. What is the definition of shame? It's that intensely painful experience when we think we are unworthy of love or belonging for whatever reason. So I'm not good enough because I'm not smart enough, thin enough, successful enough, in a relationship enough, affectionate enough, right? Whatever that story is that I'm not enough, whatever you fill in the blank in your head, right? And in those moments when you truly believe kind of those stories or those shame gremlins, as she likes to call, and that uncomfortable feeling that you feel and making like a reaction, because usually the visceral reaction to shame is to try to pull away. It's a very uncomfortable feeling because ultimately we are hardwired for connection. So the belief that something about us is so fatally flawed that makes us unworthy of that love or connection really is difficult to sit with. One thing she talks about, though, is to feel shame is to be human, right? So shame is a universal emotion for the most part. She talks about the only people that can't feel shame is someone who doesn't have the capacity for empathy. So for the majority of us, shame is something that we really do experience. So in really kind of thinking about the second insight, I also wanted to kind of go through maybe 4 elements of shame resiliency. So again, in her research, the people that really had a high ability to handle shame kind of had these 4 different elements in common. The first one is that they understood shame and their shame triggers, meaning like they understood for themselves what were the different situations in their life that would really bring on these feelings of not good enough, right? And those shame kind of messages showing up. They understood kind of what it was, so they kind of had to head up a little bit on the shame. They knew that like, hey, you know what? Maybe being vulnerable in my relationship is something that's really difficult for me, right? And so like if I feel like I'm not doing that well, if I try to be vulnerable with my partner and I get shut down, that might be a shame trigger for me, right? The second piece is really kind of practicing this awareness, again, of these shame messages, right? So the shame gremlins are really ultimately kind of really what are the thoughts and stories that show up in those moments and doing some reality checking, right? So in my example, if I put myself out there with my partner, I get shut down, kind of reality checking that thought of like, oh my gosh, maybe I'm not worthy enough, maybe I'm not good enough in this relationship. Whatever are the stories in that moment that really show up and make me feel shame and is feeling that shame, kind of really reality checking those or being aware of those. The third one is really then, once you're aware that you're also in an experience of shame and you're having these different shame messages, it's then to reach out to people that you trust and share your story. Okay, so a huge component, she repeats it throughout the book, it's kind of owning your story and sharing your story. Ultimately, it's acknowledging that we're human and yeah, sometimes we do feel shame and sometimes things happen to us and like we get all these kind of stories about us being unworthy, not good enough, and we're feeling really, really, really vulnerable. But really what's going to help in that moment to really help kind of manage and move through the shame is connection, right? Connection and empathy, it's kind of the antidote to shame. So reaching out and sharing your story, kind of being vulnerable with a trusted individual about what happened. So even in that example with my partner, might be a little bit later or in that same moment saying to my partner, I'm feeling that you're rejecting me, or I'm having the thought or feeling that I'm not good enough to be in this relationship because I got shut down, right? So reality checking those stories either with your partner if it's a trusted individual, or maybe in that example, you know, calling a trusted friend and saying like, hey, this is what happened, this situation with my partner, I've really started to feel dejected and not good enough, right? And reality checking, getting support in that moment. And the fourth one, again, it's kind of almost like wrapping them all up, but really kind of highlighting one way to really handle shame is being able, one, to acknowledge and name shame, and really using that language of like, I'm feeling ashamed, I'm not feeling good enough right now, I'm feeling inadequate. Being able to openly talk about that feeling, either again just internally or with support people that you trust, and then being clear on like, what do you need in those moments, right? So being clear like, hey, you know what, I just need you to listen to me. Or hey, you know what would be really helpful is maybe if you just kind of take a walk with me and help me move through this experience. So again, these are the 4 elements of shame resiliency. So I'd really encourage you to kind of think about and see which one you're gravitating to. Something that's really important to note is that really shame grows by secrecy and silence. So pretty much if you feel this experience of shame and you don't share it, or you don't do anything with it, or you don't seek support, ultimately the shame is just kind of festering and growing, right? Again, going back to my example, it's if in that moment I don't really even say to my partner that I'm feeling ashamed, that kind of those feelings of feeling inadequate might just grow and keep coming up, and I keep believing them they're true, right? So again, really kind of leaning into these 4 elements of the shame resiliency. So let me know in the comments below, which one is one that you really think you have to work on? Guys, 3rd insight from the book. So again, I am going to at least pick one guidepost, and just because for some reason I really gravitate towards the first one, cultivating authenticity, letting go of what people think, that's the one that I picked because I think there's so many nuggets from that first guidepost, and you'll see that a lot of the different guideposts connect if you ultimately end up picking up the book. But okay, so let's go to this, like cultivating authenticity. Ultimately, she talks about in order to do that, it's really thinking about daily choices and practices, right? It's about the choice to consistently allow ourselves to be seen in our lives, in these different areas in our lives, right? To be seen authentically, both at home with the people we care about, with who we love, and also like in different areas in our life. So at work, in different domains. So kind of really kind of leaning into that. In order to do that, you need to cultivate, of course, the courage to be imperfect, be vulnerable, and set limits, right? So she does talk about, setting boundaries is actually that will help you create more authenticity, right? Because if you're coming from a place of setting no boundaries and people pleasing and letting other people kind of disregard your needs, one, you're going to be exhausted, resentful, and that's not truly authentic to you, because you are allowed coming back from this place of worthiness. Like if you believe that you are good enough, you also believe that you are worthy of having appropriate limits with others, and that relationships should be a safe space, and boundaries are there to help cultivate that. Other piece is that you exercise a lot of compassion, including self-compassion. So I'm actually going to link this video here from Kristen Neff, my book therapy review on her book, because pretty much it's all about self-compassion, and Brené Brown actually references Kristen Neff's definition of self-compassion, so go check that out. Ultimately, it's about nurturing this connection and sense of belonging when you believe you're enough, right? So coming back to this space, if I believe that I'm worthy and I'm good enough, then that gives me permission and space to live my life from a place of worthiness, foster meaningful relationships, not foster relationships where, again, my needs aren't taken care of. One thing that I recall from her research of the book that she mentions is that really the difference between people who are wholehearted or not, using her term, the only really concrete difference is that their belief in their worthiness. That's it. They believed that they were worthy of belonging and connection, that they were enough. And because they operated from that kind of secure, safe, internal space, clearly then had all these different types of ramifications. This dig deep, right? So this dig deep, and you'll go through, she has this at the end of each chapter. Again, I think just concrete ways to really then integrate this into your life. So the first one is get deliberate. So find some type of mantra or word that helps you remind yourself of what being authentic looks like in this moment, whatever that is. And to be clear, authenticity isn't always clearly, it's not doing the easy thing. It is sometimes doing the really hard thing, but it's not also always like, I don't know, I think sometimes people think the impression of authenticity is like, well, then you just get to be aggressive and do and say whatever you want. No, right? Because being authentic goes back to leaning on your values, and that doesn't give you permission to be cruel or unkind. And for the most part, that's not authentic to who you are, at least in my experience when I've worked with people. The second one, get inspired. So really seek inspiration either from other courageous individuals, whether in the media or people you know, or any kind of story you hear when you kind of see people doing courageous things, that's going to really kind of bolster your own courage to really be more authentic, right? Or again, maybe surrounding yourself not only with people that are living their lives authentically and courageously, but also are supportive of you doing that, right? Because again, that's going to help you kind of have a circle of support and like kind of encourage you to do that in your daily life. And the G, get going, she really talks about when it comes to authenticity and letting go of what people think. Again, because it's the whole piece. The barrier to authenticity is being comfortable that you have no control over other people's perception, that in being authentic, some people are not going to like you, are going to criticize you, are going to judge you, right? Are going to make comments, and you have to kind of really be comfortable with that experience, meaning like you're not going to like it and it's going to be hard and it will be tough, hence the courage and the vulnerability to do that, but more so that again, you have to let go of that being the controlling drive in order to be more authentic. And so with get going, it's really more, again, instead of making people pleasing or, controlling other people's perception of you, right, trying to control that narrative, it's more of like you making authenticity the goal, right? So if I go into a situation and I'm really clear on what my values are, what does being authentic in this scenario look like, regardless of maybe the outcome or how people react, at least I can kind of go to bed at night and say like, well, you know what? I lived up to what was important to me. I was authentic to myself. And that's the most important. A quote in the book that really highlights this, and I just wanted to pull it up. Caution, if you trade in your authenticity for being liked, you may experience the following: anxiety, depression, eating disorders, addiction, rage, blame, resentment, and inexplicable grief. So again, it's like, yes, you have the choice to focus on being liked and pleasing and again, trying to seek approval, but there's a cost. There's a cost almost like to your soul and like kind of selling out to yourself, betraying yourself and showing up inauthentically in different areas. Clearly, let's be really clear, it doesn't mean that's always going to happen, and kind of having a clear sense of like when you are being authentic, knowing what the potential outcomes are, right? What could be the consequences if you actually do that and being prepared for that, right? So that's the other piece. When anytime I'm encouraging a client to think about what their values are and they're trying to decide, living according to their values in that moment, it's also really important to have a clear sense of like what's clearly the fear and the barrier and whether that actually comes to fruition. Are you prepared to handle that? Are you aware of that? Is that something that you can handle if it shows up? Because again, you don't have that control, and hence where that courage really has to kind of come from in mustering that. And a side note on courage, the only way you really start to get more courage is by doing the scary thing, right? It's not like there's naturally courageous people. The way you build that is by kind of putting yourself out there and building that up. That you are like motivated to go pick up this book, because honestly it really is one of my favorite books to recommend. It's an easy read. There's so many little nuggets. Some people may be turned off by the fact that it's like an easy quick read. I really enjoy that because I think again there's a lot of concrete learning that you can just take away and ultimately really practice. If you're really interested in Brené Brown's work, I'm actually going to link her website as well, so that you can see, because she has a ton of resources, not only on the Gifts of Imperfection, but her other books. I'm a Daring Way facilitator, so if you're looking to implement that in your individual life or in a group or workshop, you can also check out my website. I'll link that as well to see if that's something you also want to incorporate into your life in some fashion or form. And lastly, guys, I hope you check out this video next, because I really think it will be helpful. But regardless, I want you to continue nurturing your mind, body, and soul, whatever that looks like for you. Thanks, guys.